And thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. For those of you that don't know me, again, my name is Alberto Ramos, and I serve as the Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access at Plymouth State University. Been here about 3 years, and I'm really looking forward to diving into this conversation with you all on creating communities that promote belonging. Before we start with our conversation, I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that today's discussion is taking place on Indokina, the current and ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We also acknowledge the painful history of genocide, forced assimilation, and efforts to alienate Indigenous peoples from their territory here. We commit to supporting Indigenous communities and honoring Indigenous knowledge in our work, and with gratitude, we stand in solidarity. So today's conversation is really an important one when we think about how we foster a sense of belonging for those in our educational communities. And it's also an important conversation in our current moment. As you all may be aware, there are a lot of differing perspectives on diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And I think that in a space like this one that we're in this afternoon, we are going to have different perspectives as well. And so I'm going to read a list of community values that I hope will be able to guide our conversation today. While this is a webinar format, there will be some moments for you all to post in the chat your reflections, and I'm going to do my best to monitor those in those moments to sort of get a sense for how folks are reacting. Typically, I facilitate this session with breakout rooms or with folks in person. So this is a little bit different for me today, but I'm really looking forward to engaging with you all. And I hope that you all are able to engage with the chat, as Jeremy mentioned. And there also is the Q&A function as well. So the first community value that I want to put forward for today's conversation is a welcoming environment. So regardless of your experience with the topic of creating a community that promotes belonging, whether you feel like an expert or this is something that's new to you, you are welcome in this space. And please extend that same welcomeness to others. When you are reading the chat, you may disagree with some of the things that other folks say, and that's okay. Let's just remember to create that sense of a welcoming environment for everyone, and remember that we are welcome in the space. Engagement. Again, I have been on attended numerous webinars where it's something that you can put on in the background. And I get that wherever you're logging in from today, I'm just thankful you're here and you've chosen to show up. If at all possible, I encourage you to really engage with this topic, because the more engaged we can be with one another, the better the conversation will be. And so I just hope that you all will really utilize the chat function when we have those group reflection moments. Third is owning your own truth. This is essentially is getting at this idea that every one of us comes into these conversations from a different perspective. We all have a different life experience. We're actually going to talk a little bit about our life experiences today. I'm going to share some of my own background with you all as it relates to my educational journey. And I'm going to give you all some time on your own to reflect on your own experiences. With that said, it's important to remember that some of our experiences are the opposite from others in this space. And so just remember that regardless of your experience or your perspective, where you're coming from, that somebody else might have a different perspective than you, and that's okay. And that's actually really likely. Growth from discomfort. So my goal today in anything that I say is not to make anyone feel uncomfortable, but I can't guarantee that this conversation is going to feel comfortable. Again, like I mentioned, in our current moment, we all are coming into this conversation from a different perspective. And so for some of us, that may be less familiar with these topics. There might be a little bit of discomfort. Maybe my own experience just doesn't resonate with others in this space, and that might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. But I hope that all of us can recognize that when we feel a little bit of discomfort, we often grow the most. Uh, Curiosity mindset. So uh, when things get difficult in the conversation, if they do, I just encourage us to, instead of making judgments, to ask, maybe why are we reacting this way, or what is it about what's being said that's having me kind of question what Alberto's saying. Let's just aim to be curious, and I commit to doing the same with what's said. Thank you all, by the way, for sharing where you're coming from. I'm seeing the chat blowing up, which is great. And I apologize for not asking folks to introduce themselves. So thank you again so much for posting in the chat where you're coming from today. Again, for those that are just joining, my name is Alberto Ramos. I serve as Chief Diversity Officer and Director of Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access at Plymouth State. And we're going through community values to guide our conversation today. Speaking and listening, this is a little bit more difficult in a webinar format, but I hope that while I'll be the primary one speaking today, that you all will utilize the chat throughout the webinar, and particularly during the group reflection moments. That's your voice today, and I hope you'll share your voice and perspective today, and also respect the voice of others. Confidentiality. So what I can promise is that we will have some more challenging conversation prompts, but those are really for you to reflect on your own. And so you're never going to need to share anything today that you don't want to share. It's completely up to you. Even in the group reflection times, it's really up to you how much you want to share and post in the chat. And just so you all are aware, this is being recorded. And so I want to acknowledge that for folks. So I just encourage you to post in the group reflection what you feel comfortable with sharing publicly. But then when we do those personal reflection moments, that you can be fully honest with yourself, because it's only between you and yourself. Humility, I think this can be sometimes really challenging, because we often want to focus on our own competencies as educators, and particularly around these topics, a lot of times people will talk about gaining cultural competence, which is something that I've really tried to steer away from in my own vocabulary. I tend to focus on the idea of cultural humility, that all of us are on a journey with these topics and learning about experiences of others. And none of us actually has a perfect answer for how to create a community that promotes belonging, because everybody has a different perspective. And so I just encourage us all to lean into humility today and recognize that we all have more to learn, including myself. And then the last piece that I want to put forward is just self-awareness. So this is really important as we think about creating a community that promotes belonging. We all come into this space again with different perspectives, different backgrounds. We're going to talk about social location a little bit later, not to put anyone into a particular category to label you, because we all are individuals, yet the backgrounds that we carry, the different pieces of our identity that we hold, do inform our perspectives and reactions, and our experiences do as well. And so let's just be mindful of those today as we go into the conversation. So with that said, I just want to pause and invite folks to in the chat post anything. If anyone has any questions at this point about the community values, if anyone has anything they might like to add. Again, it's a little difficult to have a back and forth conversation when it's chat and not unmuted, but I invite anyone to share their thoughts, reflections on these community values. If there's anything missing, anything that needs to be changed before we move forward. So I'll pause just for a few seconds. All right, folks, I'm gonna continue moving forward now with our presentation and conversation today. I see a couple of folks affirming that these are good. Thank you so much. So we have a few learning outcomes as a result of today's session. My hope is that as a result of attending today's webinar, whether you're with us right now or you're listening to this recording, number one, you'll be able to reflect on your own educational journey, what's brought you to the point you're at in education. Number two, articulate the importance of belonging as it correlates to student success or student outcomes. Recognize your own social location in relation to others. And then we're going to end with identifying one action step to take towards creating an educational community that promotes belonging. So I want to start with sharing with everyone just a little bit about my own educational journey. This is a little bit of a personal experience that I'm kind of letting you in on, but I think it helps you all sort of see how this can look if you're thinking about your own educational journey and how you might share that with students you're working with. So I have sort of three images on the screen. The image on the top left is of a German flag, the image on the top right, and the one behind me is of a Cuban flag. And then you'll see the state of Minnesota below. So I was born and raised in Minnesota. I lived in Minnesota up until 3 years ago when I moved out to New Hampshire for this position. So the majority of my life was spent in Minnesota. My mom actually immigrated to the US from Germany. She's half German. My grandmother was German. My grandfather was an American, and they met right after World War II in Germany. And my mom has lived a lot of her life in Germany and in the US. On the right, I have the Cuban flag there to represent that my dad and the entire side of my family on my dad's side is from Cuba. And so having a very international and multicultural family really does sort of inform my appreciation and respect for people who have sort of different identities that they hold simultaneously and those that are bicultural and biracial. I will also mention that my dad has not been a part of my life for the majority of my life. And so I grew up primarily with my mom. And so I think that'll help sort of frame for everyone how challenging that was to be sort of labeled as half Cuban, but not really understand what it meant to be Cuban, because I didn't have that modeled for me from my own dad. The next image I want to share with you all is a story from my own primary school, elementary school experience that's really painful. So it's a softball glove and a softball. And when I was in the fourth grade, I was on a co-ed softball team, and at one of our practices, one of the kids on the team started coining my name and calling me Alberto, sort of as a joke. And at the time, I was the only Latino student, I think the only student of color on the team. And I really didn't know how to react to it at 9 years old. I think I maybe laughed along with them. I did wind up sharing that with my mom about what was being said at the practice, and she was very upset and talked to the coach about it. And the coach actually sat everybody down the following day, me included, and shared with everybody how this was not okay, which I think was powerful that the coach acknowledged it and shared that it was not okay. And numerous kids came up and apologized to me afterwards. However, what that did do for me, unfortunately, was make me feel like I was different than everyone else. And I actually really wanted to disassociate with being Latino and really didn't want to be viewed as Latino anymore. And um, people started sort of shortening my name as well, so that it sounded less Latino. And I actually leaned into that. I really didn't feel comfortable celebrating that part of my identity. And a lot of it, I think, did have to do with not growing up with my father at home to really show me how I could celebrate that part of my identity. And this continued for several years. That picture of me is my first year in college as an 18-year-old at St. Cloud State University back in 2009. So that's almost 16 years ago now at this point. And at this point in my life, it was really more of the same. Being Latino was really a source of a joke for people in my life. It it was never something that I felt like I could celebrate, and it was something that I think again was just this sort of thing that people made fun of, not intentionally trying to hurt me. I don't want to give that picture, but it was really something that people didn't really know how to deal with, especially as someone who was bicultural and appeared to be white. I sort of operated in this weird space, and um, that continued through most of my college years until I had the opportunity. This is the kind of pivotal moment for me. I had the opportunity after I graduated from college to live in Uruguay for a year. I'm not Uruguayan, I'm Cuban, as I mentioned, but it was the first moment in my life where I developed really solid relationships with other Latinos and particularly Latino men. And it was really a transformational year for me because I was able to become a lot more comfortable speaking Spanish. And I realized that this part of my identity that I felt like I had to sort of push to the side or hide, or sometimes I felt like I wasn't Latino enough because I didn't grow up surrounded by Cuban culture. Was this was just a really transformational year for me, and I think it was one of the first moments in my life where I truly felt like I fully belonged, particularly with other Latinos. There had been other moments in my life where I felt a real deep sense of belonging because of my faith. I identify as Christian and other parts of my life, but the part of my identity being Latino, and I will also mention that the majority of the people in this picture actually identified as Christian as well. So it's kind of like a piece of my life where different parts of my identity were coming together, and I really truly felt a deep, full sense of belonging for one of the first times. Really helped motivate me to want to create that in others and in my educational journey. I'll also just fast forward a bit to this is a picture of my wife and I. My wife's name is Katie, and I include this picture of me completing my master's degree with Katie because she actually completed her master's degree before me, and that really helped motivate me to want to complete my own master's degree. And that was such a powerful sense of accomplishment for me, especially because I completed my master's degree several years after my bachelor's degree, and so it was really amazing to be able to achieve that. Um, this picture is actually in my current role at Plymouth State, and at the end of the first academic year that I was on campus, we celebrated some of our graduating students from a variety of diverse backgrounds. And we've got several different students pictured here. And really, the center that I work for was created to help really foster that deep sense of belonging for all students on campus, and especially those that had historically been maybe felt excluded or marginalized. And it's just continued to grow from there. Um, I also have three kids now. This picture's a little outdated. Our daughter, you see on the right, just turned 2 now. But I still really like to share this picture. But I think about the experiences maybe that I didn't get to have as a child, and wanting to really help my own kids develop a deep sense that they belong right from the beginning. And I can imagine that anyone here that is a parent can really um, relate to the idea of really wanting your kids to feel like a deep sense of who they are and that they do belong, and how important that is. But not only for themselves, but how they can create that in others in their school if they're that age, and how they can include others that are being left out. That's something that we talk to our kids about a lot. Our two oldest are in preschool, and how they can reach out to those students in their classroom who are not getting played with, and how they can be experiencing a sense of belonging as well. I'll fast forward to this picture now. So I'm currently a doctoral student at the University of Colorado, Denver, and I just share that because it's been this sort of idea for me. I talked about humility in the beginning, and now being a full-time student myself, I have a lot more empathy for what my own students are experiencing and having to juggle multiple things, jobs, relationships, personal obligations, and with their studies on top of that. And yet, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be advancing in my education and just getting to experience it alongside a great cohort of individuals that you see here in this image. So that was kind of a brief, I guess, snapshot of a little bit about some significant moments in my own educational journey. So I want to just pause for a moment now for everyone and invite you wherever you're at. If you're in the car listening to this, if you're at your desk, if you're at home, wherever you are, I want you to just take the next couple of minutes. We'll probably take 2 minutes in silence. And I just want you to think about your own educational journey and what's led you to where you are at today, and what have been some significant or pivotal moments in your journey that's brought you to where you're currently at. So I'm going to be silent now, just for the next 2 minutes and give folks a chance to reflect on their own educational journeys. And then we'll come back together momentarily. Take about 30 more seconds before we come back together. All right, and I did see that Beth posted in the chat that she completed her master's degree 30 years after completing her undergrad, which is a wonderful accomplishment. And if anyone would like to, I'm going to continue moving along, but please feel free to post in the chat any pivotal moments you would like to share that have been significant to you in your own educational journey. Again, I'm going to continue on with the presentation, but I very much welcome anyone to post any of their own pivotal moments in the chat for everyone to see and celebrate with you. So why are we here? Again, this presentation is titled Creating Communities That Promote Belonging, and we're thinking about our educational communities. And there's so much literature out there on belonging. We could spend hours talking about it. So we don't have time to dive into all the research, but a couple of key points I want to share today to help kind of ground us is number one, the desire to belong is often considered a fundamental human motive. It's so important to us as human beings to want to belong. Belonging is directly linked to improved student outcomes. So the more students feel a sense of belonging, the better they are going to do in school. And there are so many studies that show that correlation. Third, another really important piece is that teachers and school staff can have a significant influence on the level of sense of belonging that students feel. I was reading a study actually earlier today, and I'm not going to be able to quote it directly, but I'll just kind of paraphrase some of what I was reading in the study. But it actually showed how the teacher-student relationship can be more significant to creating a sense of belonging than peer-to-peer relationships or even the student-parent relationship in terms of that sense of belonging at school, which I thought was really, really interesting. And there were numerous data points that showed that. So I think regardless of your own experiences or your roles, I think it's important for us to all to remember that we do have an impact on creating a sense of belonging for students in our communities. So how do we define belonging? A quick Google image search will give you a wide variety of images. There are numerous different definitions for what belonging is. Maybe your cultural lens sort of influences your own sense of belonging. But again, belonging is a very widely accepted term, although the definitions of it are wide and varying, and the way sort of we think about it can vary often. And again, what feels like a sense of belonging to me may feel very different for you. But I'm going to ground us all in some of the definitions that we often use at Plymouth State when we think about creating a sense of belonging. Again, this is not the sort of end all be all for defining belonging, but I want to use some key terms, and they relate to the way that we talk about inclusion, diversity, equity, and access, and how those pieces come together to create a sense of belonging. So I'm gonna go through these terms pretty quickly. Again, this webinar is being recorded, so you can look at this later on. But starting with inclusion, inclusion is the idea of bringing traditionally excluded individuals into processes, activities, and decision making or policy making in a way that shares power. I think it's important that we do recognize that inclusion is really about authenticity. There are a lot of people that do things that are seeking to be inclusive so that things look inclusive, but they're not necessarily authentic. It's also important to recognize that in this definition, it highlights those individuals that have been traditionally excluded from decision making or policy making. So it's really about power as well. It's not just actually about a feeling, it's about authority and decision making power. Diversity, again, is a lot of different aspects that make us who we are. A lot of them are visible. Many more aspects to diversity are invisible. So diversity is psychological, physical, and social differences that occur among any and all individuals. The different categories include race, ethnicity, nationality, your religious perspective, your socioeconomic status, which can change throughout your life, obviously, educational level, marital status, language, age, which changes throughout life again, gender expression, sexual orientation, mental or physical abilities, disabilities, learning styles. The list could go on and on. We could talk about our political affiliations, our ideologies, our thoughts. Diversity is so many different things. And I often summarize diversity as being reality. I think there are a lot of, again, different perspectives on the word diversity, but really, even in a webinar like this and all of the participants listening right now, we all are different from one another. And that means we have diversity in this conversation right now. Equity, another term that has a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different definitions. I think this image is a really great way to summarize the difference between equality and equity. And again, I recognize that equity is a term that might actually be something that people in this space disagree with. So if that's you, I just encourage you to continue listening. And my role here is not to convince you to believe me, but I'm just going to explain how we define equity on this campus. So equity is the intentional practice of identifying and dismantling things that could include structures, policies, practices that perpetuate inequities. So and it's really based on different groups. So it could be inequities based on race. It could be inequities based on ethnicity, gender identity, language, disability, sexual orientation, economic status, and or religion, among others. And it could be also perceived senses of belonging being different among those groups, and that's an inequity. And this image on the right here essentially describes how equal treatment for the individuals on the left image, which has, if you're not able to see the image right now, we've got an image of three different individuals that are three different heights, and they've all been given the same platform to be able to look over a fence at a baseball game. But by giving every single individual the exact same size platform, the individual who is the shortest is not able to see the game over the fence. And that's equal treatment or equality, whereas equity actually gives an additional platform to the shortest individual so that they can see over the fence. The person in the middle has the same platform, but the person on the left, the tallest individual, doesn't actually need a platform to see over the fence, and so they no longer have a platform. And so I think it's really, equity is about looking at the resources we have and ensuring that every single student, we'll keep it to the educational community, has what they need to be able to succeed and have access to resources that they need. And then the last term I want to just sort of briefly summarize is access before we look at an image of belonging. Access is tied to participation, and it's something that needs to be sought out and fought for. It doesn't just happen automatically. It needs to be legally secured, physically measured, politically protected, and it's complex. It's a complex form of perception that organizes relations between people in particular places. And I think this is interesting as well, going off of this definition, but every single instance of life can be regarded as tied to access. To do anything is to be able to have some form of access, and to not be able to do something means to not have access to something. So the reason I share all of those definitions before sharing belonging is I think they all come together to create a community or create a sense of belonging in a community. And belonging, defined by consultant named Chris Burnett, she defines belonging as engaging the full potential of individuals where innovation thrives and views, beliefs, and values are integrated. I think this image on the right has a great sort of layout for what could happen if we don't have all of the pieces we talked about before to create belonging. So for example, if we have, let's say, diversity and inclusion without equity, what will happen often is that the sort of loudest voice or the dominant group tends to always be the decision makers. If we have, let's say, inclusion and equity without diversity, is we will have a lot of people making a lot of decisions, but it's an echo chamber. Everybody generally thinks the same way. And then let's say that we have diversity and equity without that authentic inclusion piece. We will have disengagement in our organizations. We'll have high turnover. So thinking about students, we may have lower graduation rates. We also might have high staff turnover if our staff feels that they are not involved in the decision-making process. And so we really do need diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, access is the entry point into all of it to create that real deep sense of belonging that we're striving for. So one other thing I want to mention before I give folks a chance to reflect is really, how do you measure belonging? Again, there's a lot of different perspectives on belonging. There is a lot of different qualitative and quantitative data to be able to measure belonging. So some things we can look at to see how we're doing in creating a community that promotes belonging is looking at our GPAs and our graduation rates disaggregated by different groups. So we could look at that disaggregated by race and ethnicity, family income level, students with disabilities, students with different religious identities. We could also look at conducting a school climate survey. We've done those numerous times at Plymouth State. We did one on our diversity and equity and inclusion campus climate about 3 years ago. It gave us a lot of really valuable information to see which groups feel a stronger sense of belonging than others. I put on here really listening to what students are saying. I think a lot of us, myself included, like to look at the data. But then when we talk to individual students, even if it's one or two students saying something, their perspective is really, really valuable, and we should really take their perspectives into consideration. And then some other data points to consider beyond our students is looking at our employees. What are our salaries based, disaggregated by different groups? What are our hiring practices looking like? Firing or terminations or employees going? What is our employee longevity within our organization? So those are just different ways we can measure how we're doing with creating a community that promotes belonging. So I want to pause now for a moment, and um, I'm gonna, for time's sake, post all three questions up here. I'll read them, and then I want to give folks a chance to respond in the chat, and you can respond to any of these questions. So based on what we've been talking about. So number one, what does belonging mean to you? Number two, how does your role on campus help support belonging? And three, what are some barriers you might face in creating belonging? So I'm going to leave those up. And I just want to give folks an opportunity to share their reflections to any of those questions in the chat.
In Alberto, as folks are sharing their responses there was a request. Everyone seemed to, or at least I did as well, but they really loved that belonging graphic. And there was a lot of thought and wonder as to whether or not that's somewhere in the public domain and if we can find the source. So maybe not for right now, but we'll see if we can find it.
Yeah, great question. And I'll just answer that quickly. The image that on belonging is an image I created, but it's been adapted from Chris Burnett, the consultant that I mentioned, and I'm happy to share that because it's publicly available. And it's a really great image that we utilize a lot. So I'm happy to share that with you, Jeremy, to share out with folks afterwards.
Thank you so much.
All right, so I see Allison, thank you for sharing your thoughts, coaching sports after school, and really having the necessary materials or equipment for a specific sport can be a barrier. I also like how you shared your perspective on belonging means having a community you feel supported by. Dana shares belonging is having a place and feeling valued because you would be missed if you were not there. That's powerful. Thank you. Okay, folks, please feel free to continue posting in the chat as we go along, any of your thoughts to these questions, but for time's sake, I am going to continue moving forward. So I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, when we were talking about self-awareness, the idea of social location. So I want to dive into this a little bit more and then give you all a chance to do some personal reflection on this term. So social location is a combination of different aspects of one's identity. This could include race, gender, ability, class, national origin, citizenship, sexual orientation, age, and religion, among others. Though the 8 categories mentioned there are actually the ones that tend to pose the most conflict among people who identify differently. So there are numerous categories of identity that we could look at, but those are the 8 that we'll focus on for this next activity. No one has the exact same social location, even if you identify similarly in all the categories. The way you experience that it is different than somebody else. So we're all unique individuals. Nobody has the same experience. But again, those different 8 categories tend to pose the most conflict among people who have different identities. And so I want to invite everyone, again, this next piece is solely a personal reflection. I will give you all a chance to post in the chat any reflections on the activity afterwards if you want to share with folks. But I want to invite everyone, if you are at a desk, please consider writing these things down. If you are driving or don't have access to a writing utensil right now, just take a mental note. But I want everyone to first and foremost place yourself in each of these 8 categories in terms of how do you personally identify? So the 8 categories are what is your racial identity? What's your gender identity? Do you identify with having a disability? Or do you identify as not currently disabled? Socioeconomic background or your class, national origin, citizenship, sexual orientation. Age could be more than just a number, but maybe you identify as young at heart, or I am 33 years old, but oftentimes I'm perceived as younger than that. Oftentimes, depending on the context I'm with, I feel like I have to sort of dress a certain way so that folks that are older than me will kind of hear what I have to say. So that's an interesting piece that I experience with my current age. And then religion. Maybe you don't have a particular religion, but you have a certain worldview. Maybe you identify as atheist, agnostic, spiritual, whatever it is, that you're not sharing this with anyone else, is just for you. So I'm just going to give everyone a minute to sort of place themselves where you're at. And just please remember these different categories. So if you need to take a snapshot on your phone, if are able to, because I'm going to go through a series of questions now, and you're going to pick which of these categories is your answer to those questions. They're going to be fairly rapid prompts that I'm going to pull up for folks. So I'll give folks another 30 seconds or so to reflect on these categories before I move forward. All right, so now I'm going to go through a series of questions. And again, these are not questions that you're answering for anyone but yourself, but you're going to pick the category that first comes to mind. Don't take too much time to overthink it, but what the category is that first comes to mind as your own answer to each question. So the first question is the part, or statement, I should say, is the part of my identity that I am most aware of on a daily basis is. The part of my identity that I am most aware of on a daily basis is, again, you're not posting this in the chat, you're just reflecting on this on your own. I'm going to read each of these twice and fairly rapidly. I'm going to go to the next one now. The part of my identity that I am least aware of on a daily basis is. The part of my identity that I am least aware of on a daily basis is. The part of my identity that I feel most comfortable discussing is. The part of my identity that I feel most comfortable discussing is. The part of my identity that I feel least comfortable discussing is. The part of my identity that I feel least comfortable discussing is. The part of my identity that provides me the most privilege is. The part of my identity that provides me the most privilege is. The part of my identity that I believe is most misunderstood by others is. The part of my identity that I believe is most misunderstood by others is. The part of my identity that I wish I knew more about is. The part of my identity that I wish I knew more about is. That was our last one. So give folks just another couple of seconds to finish up your answers to those questions. And then we're going to take the next couple of minutes and do a little bit more group reflection. So again, please feel free to use the chat for this. But number one, how did it feel for folks to do that exercise just now? How did it feel to do that exercise. So I'll give folks a moment to respond in the chat. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. It's deep to reflect. It takes you pause before assigning an area. Maybe thinking about things you don't normally reflect on. Thank you all. Sometimes the answer is the same for multiple questions. Yes, definitely. The next question for folks, as you're able to or willing, is did you find anything surprising? If so, what was that? If not, why not? Activity was introspective. Thank you. Anything surprising? If so, what? If not, why not? Someone mentioned their age played a role in their decisions. Thank you so much. Someone shared that they were surprised how quickly they answered, but then thought maybe they should go back and reflect more. Reinforces my feelings of privilege. How little I thought about number 7. Surprised by what I'm least comfortable discussing. I think it changes depending on the context I'm in. Totally. I've definitely felt that. I found that I really needed to think about my answers. Thank you all so much. These are really, really good and powerful reflections. And then 3, this could be a particular social location category or really anything else based on that you would be interested in exploring further. So I want to pause again. And if anyone is willing to post in the chat what they would like to explore further. I know for me, I'll just share a personal reflection. I think every time I do this activity, it sort of shifts, and I've done this so many times, but I'm thinking even how things have shifted for me in terms of like my own relationship to my different parts of my identity now being a parent and what it means for me to show my kids Cuban culture when it wasn't modeled for me and what does that look like for me. I'm seeing some more reflections coming in the chat. Uh, I would like to explore more of the background, how this activity has been used. Someone shared why society sees older people as less than. Yeah, thank you. I've been working through this activity a lot, connected to a recent identity activity. Yeah, I think anytime we can really connect things to our sort of normal work that we've already been doing, increasing knowledge of white privilege. I think, yeah, why are we so quick to make assumptions of others based upon so little? Thank you for that. These are really great reflections, and I really appreciate you all sharing. Even on a webinar in this online format, I just appreciate the different honesty and vulnerable reflections you all have shared. So as we begin to wrap up our conversation today, I've given quite a bit of information. I've received a lot of information and even knowledge from you all through the chat, and which I've really appreciated. And so I think we've definitely co-created a little bit of knowledge in our time together, but knowledge alone isn't going to lead to change. There's a lot of research out there that talks about how sort of one and done trainings don't actually make any sort of impact. And so anytime I do a session like this, I always try to um, translate the knowledge, help translate the knowledge into action. And a very close mentor, colleague, friend of mine, a former boss, her name is Dr. Rashida. She has a great book called The ACA Pillars: Awareness, Courage, Action. I highly recommend checking it out on Amazon. But she talks about in her work often how um, you need all three: awareness, courage, to then act. And so I have this image of tools. So, we can have all of the tools, but if we don't actually know how to use them or take the responsibility upon ourselves to go fix the issues, we just have tools that are not being utilized. And so I ACA Pillars: Awareness, Courage, Action, Dr. Rashida. It can be found on Amazon. So I want to now invite everyone to post in the chat if you're comfortable. First, take a moment to reflect. What is one action step you will take towards creating a community that promotes belonging based upon the conversation today? There's a lot of different small steps, big steps we could take. Again, we're not looking for anything sort of revolutionary, but I'm looking for how we can together continue to move forward based on our conversation. So I'm going to pause now and give folks an opportunity to post in the chat any action steps they'd like to share that they'll be taking towards creating a community that promotes belonging. Could be ordering that book I mentioned. It could be, continuing this conversation with a trusted colleague, thinking about other resources to look into, maybe sharing this webinar with someone who wasn't able to attend today. There's a lot of different ways this could look. But again, I'll pause and be silent for a moment here and just invite folks to post in the chat if they're willing, what that step will be. One of the participants shared providing equitable opportunities for students to participate in sports, bringing a poster with the word belonging and students put up post-it notes on it. That's great. Sharing it with peers. Share the reflective activities with our school DEIJ committee since they were not able to attend. Definitely interested in the book. Definitely will share the conversation with others. Thank you all so much. These are great. Continuing the conversation with colleagues. Continue to expand picture and book chapter resources for students and educators to access. Post the community values, kid-friendly language in the classroom. That's great. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really, really appreciate you all sharing your thoughts and just continue to um, share those and work on those ideas with others that are trusted in your spaces. So as we wrap up the conversation, I do want to just invite everyone now to pull out your phones if you have them, if you're able to do this safely, and scan the QR code on the screen. If you're not able to do that, a link to the evaluation form will be sent out afterwards. I really value your feedback on this webinar and what your experience was. So just please take a moment to do that.
While we're doing that, if it's appropriate, Alberto, I just wanted to thank once again for all of you for joining. If you'd like this educator webinar and would like to view others that we've done in the past, we'd encourage you to go to plymouth.edu and search for educator. Of course, now I just forgot it. Educator webinars, and that will come right up. Again, Alberto, we can't thank you enough. And then please do fill out that evaluation, and we will, the video recording of this will be available. And again, I will work with Alberto to source the image that everyone was enjoying from previous.
Thanks. And I did put my contact information on the screen. If folks have any sort of follow-up questions to the conversation today, I'm also happy to talk with folks directly. I have my office line and email on there. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for engaging today in the conversation. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the admissions folks for inviting me to be a part of this conversation.
Not a problem at all. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you